This is 20 Minutes of Impact from the United States Energy Association Power Sector Podcast. I'm Herman K. Trabish. I've covered the power sector since 2006, and I currently report for Utility Dive. In this episode of the podcast, my guest once again is Christina Hayes, Executive Director of Americans for a Clean Energy Grid, a key advocacy group for transmission expansion and transmission modernization. Christina is going to talk about the significance of the recently finalized $1.6 billion loan guarantee for transmission upgrades from the Trump Department of Energy to American Electric Power, or AEP. Christina began her almost 30-year energy law career with Oregon's Public Utility Commission before moving to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission as legal advisor. After working in federal regulatory affairs with power sector powerhouse Berkshire Hathaway Energy, he took the lead at Americans for a Clean Energy Grid in July 2022. Christina, it's great to have you here. Let's start talking about this loan guarantee. Let's get a little bit of this details that AP is going to get from the Department of Energy. First of all, what's the difference between a loan and a loan guarantee? That's the first question. And besides the $1.6 billion amount, can you tell us something about the time period, the objectives, or other significant details that this deal covers?
Absolutely. I know it sounds like it must be sort of an arcane difference, right, between a loan and a loan guarantee, but it's helpful to think about the costs that flow through customer rates. And one of the really significant costs stems from the cost of debt, right?
Mm,
So a lot of times we hear in rate cases, we think about the return on equity debate that happens in terms of developing the overall rate of return. And usually the cost of debt just flows right on through. It's the best deal that the utility can get on the market. Here, by having this loan guarantee in this high interest rate environment, there might be other issues at play. It really helps drive down AEP's borrowing costs associated with these new technologies being used to upgrade their existing lines. And it is a huge investment. So AEP serves about 5.5 million customers across 11 states, operating the largest electric transmission system covering 40,000 miles of lines in the United States. So a really big system. This particular loan guarantee of $23 billion it was part of an overall package of $23 billion that DOE was
wow.
offering total assistance, will help reconductor and rebuild roughly 5,000 miles of transmission lines across Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, Oklahoma, and West Virginia. So a significant rebuild of aging infrastructure that's really going to help with increasing and improving capacity across a large swath of the United States. So it's a big promise. It's a big loan guarantee, but it should actually result in very few dollars out of pocket, but help reduce costs overall for customers, which is a great win.
Mm. So very few dollars out of pocket for the government. Is that right? In other
Yes,
words, they're not,
right.
but AEP still has to spend that money. And what couple of questions. How did AEP get singled out? I think there were a bunch of loan guarantees that were planned under the last administration, um, but this one got pushed through recently. And so, do you know, is there a reason AEP was singled out? Is it the size of the system?
I think this administration is being very thoughtful and methodical in terms of going through things one by one. I can't say why one has been approved and another one might still be waiting on final outcome. We know that the area that's involved is significant around data center development. So anything around kind of
Ah,
that Northern Virginia bottleneck. We know that AEP has been engaged in a lot of development in that area. Ohio, famously had its uh, data center, large load tariff recently approved. So we know this is an area where there's a lot of significant electric development occurring. And so hopefully it is the first of many from this DOE.
okay. So in this particular case, I think this is not for new transmission, but for upgrades. Am I right about that? And what kind of upgrades are we talking about? I've read something about some really important new technologies that could be funded through this.
And we're still finding out more about that, right? And so there are a lot of different ways to upgrade the kinds of wires associated. I think usually in terms of high capacity transmission, right? And so looking to put different kinds of conductors that involve new materials that can reduce sag, reduce line losses, that sort of thing. My understanding at this, and to be fair, there's a lot of attention on that for high capacity lines, sometimes at the expense of the lower level distribution lines that also need significant upgrades. It's an aging system. It might be in a part of the country that doesn't see a lot of attention, but it is still really important to make sure that for redundancy, for service down to the last customer in every part of our country, that they get upgraded service. So it's exciting to see this Department of Admin just it's exciting to see this Department of Energy focused on the need for upgrading all kinds of lines of all kinds. Certainly, generation tends to get the most attention, but to see a real focus on upgrading the wires is terrific to see.
Do you know if the money that AEP is going to invest will cover grid enhancing technologies?
So grid enhancing technologies tends to focus on dynamic line ratings, ambient adjusted line ratings, topology optimization, and a lot of other things they never taught me in law school. So I apologize. I'm not, and the fun part is, from a science perspective, I'm hearing about new technologies all the time. There was a recent article about some new technologies being adopted in the Pacific Northwest, where I'm from. Portland General was working with folks who are using AI to further optimize their use of their grid. It's really exciting, what's out there. I don't know that that speaks to this loan guarantee in particular. There's certainly a range of uh, technologies that can be adopted, and sometimes we just have to do the regular blocking and tackling and refreshing 70-year-old lines. And there's
Right.
certainly a need for all of that.
I guess it depends a lot on what AEP comes up with in terms of its plans
Indeed.
to take advantage of this loan guarantee. Do you think that, I mean, obviously it covers a lot of money in a lot of states. Do you think that these kinds of things will help just address all the regional and interregional transmission needs just across this particular territory, or is it going to be more local?
I was thinking about this, and while this loan guarantee really is focused on the local lines, it's helpful to zoom out again for a minute and focus on what we talked about at the top of the conversation around how this saves customers money, right? So this is going to save something like $275 million in financing costs. And so when
Hmm.
AEP sits down and looks at its budget and what it's going to invest in, now it has additional funds to take another risk, and not even a risk, but to look at another larger project in another part of its uh, service territory, or broader. So I guess I don't think of the loan guarantee specifically for targeting regional and interregional lines, but in terms of helping the budget overall and opening up headroom in the budget and thinking about other kinds of regional or interregional lines that could better serve customers. Now they have a little bit more to work with, and I think it's helpful in that way.
Ah, interesting. Okay, so that's what I wanted to ask about is to what extent this could be an indication of the administration's inclination to be more supportive of what Americans for a Clean Energy Grid are advocating for, which is something called a macrogrid. Um, what is a macrogrid, and how would it go farther toward meeting greater U.S. transmission needs? And it sounds like what you're saying is that this could be a signal that the administration will be more supportive of that type of thing. But before we answer that question, tell us what a macrogrid is.
Sure. A macrogrid, quite simply, is thinking about it as the interstate highway system for the electric grid, right? Thinking about those multi-state, multi-region lines that helps expedite power from one part of the country to another. If there's a severe weather experience where there are a significant number of customers, is there a place where there's excessive generation that's able to make it across, keep costs low, and keep the lights on at the same time? So the macrogrid really is a lot of neighbors helping neighbors with that high capacity transmission around the country. In terms of how that helps the overall the U.S. Picture is it helps keep costs down by again making sure that customers in any particular country have access to the lowest cost, most reliable power, diverse generation resources, and in diverse circumstances, right? So if you have a generating plant in an area with a cold snap, you might be able to access another generating plant somewhere where the weather is more temperate and they have more to offer. So there are tremendous benefits associated with a macrogrid. And I think we're seeing other hints that the administration is interested in building out the grid to that benefit. In the AI action plan, the administration talked about the need to stabilize, optimize, and grow the grid. So stabilize was more about generation resources, preventing retirements. Optimize was about using gets, as you mentioned earlier, dynamic line ratings, reconductoring, other things. But growing the grid, the building out transmission lines and building out the generation associated with it, super important. And we were talking earlier about the letter that Chris Wright just wrote to FERC, talking about the need to have substantial investment in the nation's interstate transmission system. So we're really excited about some of the early signs of what this administration is looking to do.
So the macrogrid is interstate. It crosses regional boundaries. It crosses state boundaries. It weaves things together. And we've seen examples of where a macrogrid system really could have or did help. In I think it was 2022, California had this heat dome, and generation was shared from the Pacific Northwest to California and back and forth, and it kept them from having an emergency. And people certainly remember a little earlier the freeze in Texas, where we've seen lots of research showing that there was ample generation east and west of Texas that could have kept people from freezing, right? I mean, do you remember that?
Oh, absolutely. Because of Texas's special jurisdictional status, they're exempt from federal jurisdiction and they prefer not to have significant ties with the rest of the country. So they were only able to import, tens of megawatts, as opposed to in the rest of the country, where there was also a freeze. In fairness, they were able to wheel 13 gigawatts of power from PJM to MISO to SPP. So they didn't have an outage for more than 3 hours at a time. Whereas Texas, they were only able to import something like 80 megawatts, something like that, and they lost power for 3 days with some really dire consequences. There's some great proposals out there to enhance the transmission connections between Texas and the remainder of the country, even preserving their special jurisdictional status. But we haven't seen those lines really take off just yet. And it's incredible to me, given the value, not just economic value, but value in human life that those lines could have. It's so important to get those up and going.
And the macro grid may not include that specific thing, or it may not be able to reach Texas's treasured borders, but the concept can take hold by expanding the use of this concept of the macro grid, don't you think?
Absolutely. And so it's helpful to think about it as a highway, but also a highway needs service roads and off ramps and support, right? Support streets. And so that's a lot of what this AEP loan guarantee goes towards is, the supporting lines that are needed to help bolster the system on which a macrogrid would rely. That's really kind of the the preferred final outcome, to not have this kind of balkanized system that we currently have that is severely limiting in terms of the kind of power we're able to um, move forward for data centers and increase manufacturing and all of that. Doing that on an islanded basis, even if you build nice big islands, it's still pretty expensive. So it's interconnecting the rest of the country that's going to make those kinds of economic opportunities available for everyone across the country and at the most affordable rate.
Yeah, and the other thing that we've seen that could be an indication of support from the administration is the emphasis on permitting uh,
Yes,
improvements. Assuming the government comes back someday,
ever.
um, we will. The the Congress it has been discussing a lot of really interesting proposals. If you want to hear the big last exchange of this terrific conversation, support the podcast by subscribing at just $2.99 per month to the Power Sector Podcast's Power More. With your subscription, you'll get both parts of the content delivered directly to you the second they drop.